Welcome to the program, everybody. I'm Reverend Said. Thank you for joining me. And today I'm going to read a little bit about the birth of Israel and use it as the introduction to the beginning of my reading of the book of Exodus. If you're new to this channel, you can go ahead and check out my playlist for the book of Genesis and the book of Job series in their entirety as read from my beautiful chronological life application study Bible that I have here, and that I'll eventually finish reading from cover to cover for myself and for anyone else that wants to join me. All right, I'll go ahead and get started with my brief reading of the birth of Israel. God's chosen family grew into a large nation in the land of Egypt, but it wasn't long after Joseph died that a new pharaoh decided to turn them into a nation of slaves for building his kingdom. For 400 years, the Hebrews multiplied quickly as people, but they also suffered under an increasingly oppressive yoke of slavery. Eventually, the burden was so great that they cried out to God for deliverance, and he chose to act by freeing them from their slavery and fulfilling all of his covenant promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Lord raised up Moses to lead his people out of slavery. After a dramatic and miraculous exit from Egypt, God revealed himself to them at Mount Sinai through the Ten Commandments and the rest of the law at Mount Sinai. God wanted to set his people apart so that the entire world would recognize them as his people and would want to follow him as well. But while Moses was meeting with God at Mount Sinai, the people began acting just like the other nations, creating their own idols to worship. This was not a great beginning for God's new nation. The people of Israel were grateful to be delivered from slavery in Egypt, but it didn't take long for them to begin complaining about the difficulty of traveling through the wilderness. God responded to their complaints with gracious, miraculous provisions of water and food. Even after this, when their travels through the wilderness were about to be over, this young nation refused to trust God to give them the land that he had promised them in Canaan. 10 of the 12 scouts that were sent to look over the promised land were convinced that the people there were too powerful to be defeated. Listening to them, the nation rebelled against God and refused to follow Moses into the land that had been promised to Abraham and Jacob. As a result, God punished them by forcing them to wander in the wilderness for 40 years until nearly the entire generations of adults who had been delivered from Egypt had died. In spite of his people's consistent rebellion and grumbling, God remained faithful. He remembered his covenant promise to Abraham and Jacob, and he had created a great and powerful nation from their descendants. God led the nation a second time to the border of the promised land. Moses then taught the law to a new generation of Israelites and entrusted Joshua, one of the only 2 adults from the first generation who was allowed to enter the promised land, with leading the nation forward. Much of the book of Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy are devoted to relating the law that God gave Moses for his people. So what can Christians learn from long-term sections describing the detail, priestly service, or dietary restrictions, and how does this law fit into the story of the Bible? God made covenant promises to Abraham and his family so that they will become a great nation. And through his descendants, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. God has chosen to relate the word through this family, and the law played a crucial role in their transitions from a group of related people into God's chosen nation. The law gave them a structure for organizing themselves in the land that God would give them. It gave them instructions on how to worship God and to remember all things that he had done for them. It taught them to depend on God to provide for their needs and to forgive them for their sins. It showed the world that there was something different about this nation, something holy. The law also revealed God's care. For example, laws protecting the poor and the powerless called on God's people to reflect his attitude in their interactions with people around them. The Ten Commandments are a powerful summary of the religious and ethical standards that God has for his people. As we read the law, let's reflect on who God is and who he wants his people to be. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap up our study and reading for right now. But please hit that subscribe button and get updated for the next reading, where I'll be starting at Exodus chapter 1, verse 22. Also, don't forget to like and share. And until the next time, thank y'all for joining me again. And y'all stay blessed.